Okay, are we ready for the afternoon? Did everyone, yeah. This is that part where we stand up again. All right, very good. We're really excited about the next panel. You know, I think Jay mentioned it earlier this morning, and because I'm a university professor, I can always quote Hegel, and Hegel said, you know, for something to be true, it must first be possible. And I think imagination is such a critical part of the innovation endeavor and the university endeavor, and we really wanted to front that at the conference. So we're really excited about the next session. Bringing up Teresa and her team. Ready? Ready. Okay. Oh, here they are. They're already here. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you, everybody. This afternoon, I know it's we have a interesting thing. It's after lunch. You know, we're all settling, but we're going to try to keep you really entertained and engaged. So this afternoon, our panelists will be having a conversation about how the arts, creativity, and culture interface with the themes of the RISE conference, which are, what's R? Research. I? Innovation. S? Sustainability. E? Congratulations. All right. Several people knew those. That's great. So my name is Teresa Davis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the CEO and founding director of Davis Studio. And I am joined by Jen Karson, and you can just acknowledge so they put that two together. Jen Karson, who's a lecturer at UVM and director of the Fab Lab. And they're also back there. There we go. And Russ Scully, who is the owner and developer of Hula. And Sonja Lunde, director of the Fleming. So we're excited to have you join us. And what we're going to be doing is exploring how to leverage art, culture, and creativity as powerful assets for a vibrant economy and for thriving communities. So it's a big topic, but we're excited to do that. I would like, again, we're going to keep with the audience participation time a little bit. We're going to, start with dessert. Raise your hand if you are somebody who thinks that life is short and we should eat dessert first. Who's in that crowd? Okay, we got a lot of people. Raise your hand enthusiastically if you would like to eat more dessert, maybe even today. Who's into that? Who would like some more dessert? Okay, Jay Wall is going to help me find somebody who's an enthusiastic waver. So we're going to wave again if you're like, I would like to eat more dessert today. Okay. All right, Jay. Jay's going to find somebody, and you're going to have the easiest and most delicious job of this entire conference. So we're going to have somebody come up here and join us. Here, would you hold my mic for a second? Are they coming? Are they on their way? Yay for a volunteer. All right, come right on up here. This is the easiest and best job. You all are going to wish you volunteered. You're just going to stand here and hold this. Just stand right there. It's only going to be for about a minute. Tell me your name. Riley. Let's all rise for Riley. Can you all stand up and give Riley some applause here? Thank you, Riley. Okay. So we appreciate that. The reason that we are looking at a cake right now is it dovetails with the really fabulous analogy that Jay gave us a little bit earlier about artists being involved in different ways. So many of us in our society today think art is the last thing, it's the decoration. How many of you feel like either you think that or people you know think that? Like art comes in at the end and makes it pretty. Maybe you don't share that philosophy, but I know you know people who do, because that is often how that's kind of looked at. So the arts often get treated like the icing on the cake. And is the icing on the cake good? Yes. But we on our panel here, and I bet you agree, Riley, that art is not just the icing on the cake, it is really the whole damn cake. And the essential ingredients of art are baked into every layer. And we think that the world would be much better, which is also one of the parts of what RISE is trying to make a better tomorrow. We think there would be a better tomorrow if artists, creators, makers, and innovators had a seat at the table in everything that was planning, but had that seat from the very beginning, and not just at the end to put a bow on it. So how many of you will commit to the next time you have a meeting of any sort, making sure somebody who's really got that creative energy is either there or that you lean into your own creativity? Hands up for that. Okay, great. That is all you had to do. Oh, the other thing is, every time you see a cake, can you also remember that? Okay, that'd be the other thing. Riley, we're going to put this in the box. You get to take this home with you today. And there's a sticky in there. And you want to refrigerate it tonight. Okay. All right, great. She's got it. And we're going to add some little beauty to her. All right, there we go. Thank you, Riley. We really appreciate it. So thanks again. Yeah, some enthusiastic applause. All right, thank you. It's really a very brave thing to do, to volunteer for something that no one has explained to you what's going to happen, so we are appreciative of her. Like I mentioned, the panel is going to be discussing how culture, creativity, and the arts comprise the heart and the soul of our communities. Well, all three of these words are huge concepts, and we could spend a few hours trying to define them. So anybody here have a pen with them or paper? If you do, I recommend that you just get that out and write these three words down. And these would be, if we don't take the time to do it now, it'd be really interesting for you to come up with your own definition of culture, your own definition of creativity, and your own definition of art. There have been people who have done entire PhD studies about these. You know, these are big, huge words, and yet they are the very things that make our lives worth living and the things that are exciting. How many of you during the pandemic turned to art, creativity to kind of help you get through things, right? We were watching movies, we were reading books, we were relying on people who had innovative ideas for ways to keep us connected, and that's what culture, creativity, and art do. They keep us connected. So, you know, definitions of these are tricky. When I think of culture, it's the way of life of a particular group at a particular time. That would include customs and beliefs. And when we want to understand an ancient culture, we look at their art, and that tells us so much about them. If we want to understand a family culture, sometimes that's part of it, art or film or memories that have been collected, letters, writings. Every society has a culture. Every business has a culture. So that's just a little tip of the iceberg for culture. Creativity. Creativity expert Sir Ken Robinson, he has a great TED Talk if you haven't seen it. Creativity is the ability to bring something new into the world that has value. It goes way beyond imagination. It's thinking outside the box and then putting that thinking into action. And I loved what Kyle said this morning. It's about doing real things. And I think that's exactly what creativity is about. And then art, that's the one that I think is very hard to define. But it's part of it is the expression of our ideas and emotions presented in a form that's often made for others to interpret or experience. So arts can include painting, sculpture, literature, architecture, cinema, music, and theater. From the cool-looking sneakers that we buy and wear to memorable performances we attend, art makes our lives better in so many ways that we don't think about. The last thing I'm going to encourage you to do is we dive into, we're going to handle 3 or 4 questions today, but if you've had that pen out and a piece of paper out, I'd really encourage you to just make marks or doodle during this panel. It has actually been scientifically proven that people who are mark making, or doodling, drawing, while they're listening to information, retain 30% more of that information. So who in here got in trouble in school for doodling in their margins? Okay. You can go right back to your teacher and show them that scientific study and tell them they were wrong. So we'd love either your eye contact or your doodling, and we're going to start our panel. I'm going to join everybody here on the couch. Thank you. I'm sitting on my glasses, which I had my contacts changed yesterday, and so I'm doing a lot of this, which is really exciting. I like to keep it on the edge, right? So for the first question, we're going to really talk about what we think is kind of the core fundamental question, which is how do we leverage arts, culture, and creativity as powerful assets for a vibrant economy and for thriving communities? So who wants to kick us off with kind of the way that we think about that one? Sonja, you're looking.
Sure.
Like I saw it. I saw the glint in her eye.
I will start. Thank you, Teresa. And it's so nice to see all of you here today. It's an honor to be here. I am the Fleming Museum's relatively new director. I've been here about 7 months, but I am a native Vermonter, newly returned to my beloved home state. And I really appreciated so many of the words that were spoken this morning by Senator Leahy, President Garimella, and the panel, and the other panels this morning, really talking about what makes Vermont special and how all of our work really intersects in unique ways because of the place in which we live and work and live our lives. So I guess I just wanted to say that as a preface and a segue into speaking specifically about my field, the field of art museums, and even more specifically, college and university art museums, that I believe they are really places where I hope, when they're at their best, can facilitate opportunities for people to reflect on their own lived experiences through objects and stories that may be familiar or completely unfamiliar to their own. This dovetails so nicely to so much of what Jay Wall spoke about earlier this morning, too. And even just your remarks just now, Teresa, that the arts are really, can operate kind of as a gateway and are tremendous assets, not only to the university, but to the culture of our communities everywhere, both rural and urban. And, you know, to borrow from Jay, I believe, too, that art is oxygen. Art is baked into this cake. It's a lens through which we can reflect, I think, upon our shared and lived experiences. It's life. So it's inextricable to our culture. It's just part of it. So.
Thank you so much, Sonja. Jen, I'm waiting for subtle signs. If they pick up the mic or they look at me a certain way, they get called on. All right, Jen.
Hi, my name is Jen Karson, and my position here at UVM is unique in that I'm in the College of Engineering and Mathematical Sciences, but also in the College of Arts and Sciences. And on this question, I just wanted to speak to a few specific examples. And the first is a symposium that we organized this spring with Burlington City Arts, and this was a UVM involvement across the campus, which is an art and AI symposium, where we used the arts to really explore and probe the questions that are coming to the forefront today about artificial intelligence and how we want to shape artificial intelligence as a new tool in our culture. Concerns people have, excitement people have, and the arts served as a wonderful tool to do that because of the way that we can engage so freely around visual images. And this was a wonderful coming together and leveraging of creativity across our campus, from OVPR to the College of Engineering to the School of the Arts to an EPSCoR 2 grant. And it was something that was very meaningful for everyone there. Other opportunities that UVM helps to put out there are our internship programs, where we have students actually working in the community and helping to solve problems and work on projects and add that extra oomph to things going on. And in the School of the Arts, we have Arts in Action, which is a program in New York City where students get a semester in New York City working with nonprofits and looking at the history of arts and activism. And then another just stellar example, if you haven't had an opportunity to participate in our senior design night, which is the result of a capstone program with the College of Engineering, where we have interdisciplinary teams of students from engineering solving problems in the community for businesses and also for state and city entities. And these are all programs that are really available to those of you in small business or any business in Vermont, and also in the community as well.
Thank you, Jen. It just reminds me that through the arts, it's such a bridge builder, and you've mentioned things that I think a lot of people, if we had over 54% of people who aren't connected to UVM, but they may or may not know about these things happening, and I think these kind of arts and innovation projects and conferences, like you mentioned, that bring in a lot of different individuals can be a great way for the community and UVM to interface. Speaking of just business, I want to reframe the question a little bit for you, Russ. How does creativity or culture contribute to entrepreneurship, to either one business in general or just business innovation collectively?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. So I was a fine arts major in school. I feel like everything I've ever done, I led with art first. I feel like if you approach pretty much anything, marketing, design, communication are all very obviously arts focused. Everything I've ever done has been really beginning with the message and the visuals, like how are we communicating whatever it is we're trying to communicate. And I think that if you approach whatever you're doing with that perspective and through that lens, you really make it a lot easier on even the people who are trying to deliver that message or ultimately trying to sell a product. It's much easier to sell a sexy, well-designed, well-utilized, something designed for utility than it is to something where none of that thinking went into place from the beginning. So like, the cake metaphor was a great metaphor. I really think you start with design first. Like I said, I was a fine arts major. I started off in graphic design before I did anything. That was the first thing I ever did out of school. I got really immersed in graphic design, really around messaging, design first, got into web design, leveraged all kinds of design backgrounds and skills in web design around how to communicate messaging really effectively using design. And then, and then more recently we can get into it, but it parlays into everything. Art surrounds us all the time, but architecture, this space right here, why was this space designed this way? Why was it designed to hold these kinds of events? What are the utilities of this room that make this work so well? It has to do with design first. Someone designed this room for this purpose. And we'll get into it later, but we took that perspective to heart when we built Hula, for instance, very recently. And the architecture and design of Hula was very thought through from the beginning. We spent a lot of time really detailing out exactly how that space was going to work. We went and visited a lot of other spaces that were really successful in creating collision spaces. It was really about creating community and making sure that we applied the right framework of design to make sure that we got the successes we wanted to see from people being in the same space, sharing the same space, and ultimately that space adding additional value, like almost intangible value that we didn't necessarily immediately perceive was there, but came through thoughtful design. And it really exceeded our expectations in terms of the amount of connectivity that happens as a result of some of the thinking and the planning that we put in place in the design of that building. And yeah, it's worked out really well.
Thank you, Russ. I think what struck me, what you were just saying, is how much our environments and our objects and even the clothing we wear affects how we connect with and relate to one another. And sometimes that design happens but doesn't center people. And I know that was something that's been brought up earlier in this conference as well, about centering people in these decision-making things. And that makes all of the difference and is really effective when we see that happen well. So I was struck by what Rhonda Phillips talked about this morning, about 3 things that together make Vermont unique. And what she had mentioned was our focus not only on economy, but also on ecology and on well-being. So this next question has a little bit more to do with well-being. And many of you may have recently read the U.S. Surgeon General's alarming report that declared a new public health epidemic in America. How many of you read that or know what that is? Great, a few of you. If you haven't heard, he stated with a really well-written report, there's an increasing epidemic of loneliness and isolation in the United States. The report finds that loneliness has profound effects on mental health and contributes to physical health issues as well, such as heart disease, stroke, and dementia. It tracks a decline in social connections and links all of this to billions of dollars of health costs. So with that as a bit of a framing, I'm wondering how each of you think that the arts and creativity can prevent loneliness and contribute to our individual and our collective well-being.
I don't mean to go in the same order every time, but I'm going to segue a little bit from what Russ just said. There's something happening maybe across the arts, but certainly in the museum field, there's a real shift from being sort of didactic and very object-centered to being people-centered, and essentially trying to retrofit, in many cases like the Fleming, 100-year-old buildings to be more people-centered, where my hope in the coming years is to really leverage the Fleming for the incredible gem and asset that it not only is for UVM, but it is for the larger public community, and hopefully transform it into a physical space and kind of hub for sharing and sharing of ideas and engagement between all sorts of people. Museum spaces and arts organizations like the Fleming are unique, especially on a college campus, and I think we're talking about that a lot today. It's a place where, unlike in an academic department where you have to pay money and register and enroll in a course to participate, you don't have to do that to come over to the Fleming. Anybody is welcome to come over to the Fleming, whether you're a member already of the UVM community or from the larger public community. So the building and the things that we do there to activate that space, I think, are really special in terms of functioning as kind of a triangulation point or sort of a gateway between a portal between the university and a number of neighborhood communities. So that goes a long way, I think, to maybe solving or overcoming these emerging problems around loneliness and isolation, because the Fleming and other arts organizations can really serve as a gathering place for people. So.
That's wonderful. It reminds me just a little bit what you just mentioned in regards to museums. I teach a class at the Comprehensive Pain Clinic for art for pain management, and there have been some really interesting studies that taking people to museums actually measurably reduces their pain. And part of what they're thinking is it is the social connection, is the connection with the arts, and it is also the social connection, and all of that together becomes a powerful, it can measurably impact them, which is really kind of exciting. And so I think there's connections between students and people who aren't part of UVM campus. I think there's connections with the medical facilities. I think there can be so many connections that art can really be. I love, Jay mentioned this, that the art can be the connective tissue. And we're so often in our bodies thinking about the lungs, the kidney, the bones, and we forget that without the connective tissue, we would just fall apart. So I think that is another good analogy for the arts, that we really can be that connective tissue in our communities, and we should capitalize on the power of that. So do we want to, either one of you, address loneliness or well-being? Russ?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I could talk about this for a while at this point, but I mean, I think it's helpful to go through a little bit of the background of like just building the Hula building, right? Which, we started this whole project before the pandemic. So one of the things we learned about loneliness, right? We learned a lot about loneliness through the pandemic, unfortunately. A lot of people felt tremendous amount of pain through that whole process. It was ugly. The wild thing is, we designed that building. We worked with a local architect. We spent weekly meetings for probably about a year, coming up with the paper design for the campus at Hula. And we did all this before we even knew about a pandemic or anything that was coming. So this is all pre-pandemic. We were designing office space for what we thought would be the future need for office space. And we were doing it with a good team, but none of us were experts or who had done this before. We were using our gut and intuition and so on, and applying just good, solid design practicality. And, one of the things we learned is then we went into the pandemic, obviously, and then one of the things we learned is coming out of the pandemic is I think we really just, fortunately, and almost by happenstance, I think we stumbled on to ultimately a design that was going to be a really great vehicle for the post-pandemic work life. And mostly because there's so much, going back to what I said earlier, there's so much connectivity that's built into the floor design of the building. If any of you have ever been inside the building, you know what I'm talking about. But we used a lot of glass, right? The number one rule, we went down to WeWork in Manhattan for like 3 days, and we visited about 12 different WeWork offices, which was actually pretty funny because they don't just let you come in and do a tour. You kind of have to, you have to sort of present yourself like you're a company that's interested in renting desk space. So we got to play around with different roles and scenarios, and I was there with my creative director, Jeff Henderson, who's an amazingly talented designer who's I've worked with for like, I don't know, 10 years or so. He's one of my best friends. And Rob Lair, who's the guy who helped me get Hula started, who's our CEO and runs the fund and so on. But the three of us went down there, and it was really fun because we would trade off roles. Right before we walked into a WeWork, we'd be like, all right, let's just pick an industry. What are we? Like, let's go with something we know, like magazine publisher. All right, we're a magazine publisher. This time I'm sales, you're art, and you're accounting. And anyway, we went through that. We went into a bunch of different WeWork offices, and one of the things we learned is the value of glass. Glass was huge. Don't put up sheetrock. Why block a line of sight between you and another person with a wall? That just cuts off communication. Not just, I mean, there's no verbal communication, but there's clearly body language that happens, and there's that initiation of, hey, that's somebody I want to go talk to, and it stimulates so many conversations that obviously you wouldn't have otherwise. And so one of the things I think we're really fortunate to have fallen into through design is we kind of found a really nice framework for the post-COVID work life, and it became something that obviously people desperately needed, who needed to reconnect. So you know, for everyone who's working in a traditional office, I think the real challenge, obviously, and still exists a little bit today, is trying to incentivize people to come back to work. I think that the one thing that's nice about the campus kind of atmosphere that we've created is the people you see day to day are not exclusively your coworkers, which is not a good thing or a bad thing, but it introduces this variability. You're going to run into people that you didn't expect to see every single day. I kind of think about it as like you're the local Burlington airport sometimes, you know? It's just a big ground floor space where there's people floating through the building every day, and there's generally new people all the time. So there's a very good chance you're going to run into somebody that you haven't seen in a while that you're really looking forward to connecting with. And so the last thing I'll say is the energy of the space, right? The architecture and the design of it really lends itself to energy that's kind of a little bit, it just stops you in your tracks really when you walk in. I mean, I still feel it, even though we're so tightly, obviously, involved with it, but I hear it from a lot of people. It's a sense of belonging. It's a sense it's the opposite of loneliness. It's really the sense of, hey, I'm here as part of a bigger thing, and look at all this energy going on, and you again, you immediately connect with other people. You're seeing other people doing things that inspire you, not just to do great work, but they just inspire you by whatever energy or enthusiasm is going on that day. You're feeling it. And so ultimately, I get a lot of feedback from people of the just level of optimism, honestly, that they've sensed from being in that environment. And it's nothing that we did necessarily. I think it's really a factor of the design of the building and the space that has created that feeling.
Thank you, Russ. That's great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, something and as you were telling that whole story, one thing that really stood out to me is how when you were in the situation where you had to figure out how to get into these places to look at them, you really used play, literally, right, to be able to solve that problem. And that kind of being able to sort of let go and use play to solve problems is so inherent in the arts. Just to sort of let go, not be so serious at some point, play a role, do something different, and ultimately solve your problem. Another thing I can pick up on there too is you were talking about the optimism, and I do think that the inherent in innovation there is optimism, right? Because like there's a belief that a change can be made and should be made, and there's energy going into that. And I wanted to put forward a model in the arts where these things come together, and this is the artist residency. And so an artist residency, for those of you who don't know, there's many different kinds of them. They're all over the country, where basically groups of artists come together in a shared space, and you may share communal meals and things like this over a week to 5 weeks to a couple of months, and you're doing your work on your own independently, and then being able to come back to a group of artists for conversation, for sharing meals, and then there are usually presentations and things that happen in the evenings. And I'm just actually back just a few days from a residency called the Center for Machine Arts that's in Peekskill, New York. And like the residencies I usually go to are sort of are people coming out of both arts and technology. And what we were doing for the whole week was playing with different prototypes of pen plotters, which is kind of a vintage kind of printer where you actually have a pen that is making the lines. And so we were working with pen plotters from the 80s, and we were working with prototypes for new models of sort of the pen plotter coming back and being a part of art. This has been something that's been inherent in computer art. And it was such a reminder for me as what it's like to be a student, which was really important when you're grappling with things and you're having to learn new things. But the pressure was on because we had an exhibit at the end of the week and we had to show all of our work. And I mean, talk about a collision, right? But I would love to see these kinds of things happening outside of the arts, and because it's such a wonderful opportunity to just be able to meet people who you aren't in your normal sort of scene of things, to be exposed to people who are participating in practices maybe different than your own, and to sort of have this pressure on, like you're going to learn some new things and you're going to present to the public, or at least to the people that you're working with there. But this is just one example that I'm providing that are so inherent in the arts in terms of making meaning and making community and supporting a group of people who, you know, in this country, the arts aren't really that well supported in terms of you're going to compare it with Europe. So there are people who come out to make these opportunities available, but could it be beneficial? I would even throw it out to you if you did a kind of some sort of an artist residency or something like this with your own people in your own group for like one day. You know, rather than a retreat, everybody learned something new, whether it's the Arduino microcontroller or maybe it's everyone plays a video game or something like that together. But I'm just throwing this out there. I think there are a lot of wonderful practices within the arts communities that are sort of maybe buried beneath this sort of thought that, oh, art is about making pictures and I can't do art because I don't draw. I mean, it's just so much more than that. And by engaging with those of us who are in these areas, we really can help bring these more to the forefront and bring them into other disciplines.
Thank you. What struck me from the comments was really just how much play can be part of this and how much those collisions with people and I love that kind of those positive collision imagery. I was just sitting at my table at lunch and somebody commented that everybody here is so interesting, I would have never met them at a regular conference that I go to because it's very industry specific. How many of you here have met somebody that you would not have met at a different kind of a conference? So that's the whole joy of participating in something like this, is really shaking it up a little bit. And I always think the most interesting things happen at the intersection between two seemingly unrelated things. And that's kind of what's happening here, which is really inspiring. So, you know, and the next question that I wanted to pose was really about placemaking. So we often think of, you know, centering people and looking at the places where we connect and where we reside. And placemaking is really about improving the quality of those public spaces. And consequently, when we improve those, we improve the lives of people who live in those spaces. So I'm just curious from the panel, your insights on, you know, what's a step that you think our communities can take to improve our public spaces? And we could think about urban examples or rural examples, but also just even thinking about our community as far as workplaces and businesses. And so kind of stretching it from the public to the private, but thinking of those places where we gather. What are things we can do to, you know, influence or improve placemaking and make our places where people can belong and play?
Well, I'll take a shot at this one, but big shout out to the City Place redesign. I think that's a classic example, and I get the streets always mixed up, but I think it's Cherry Street, which is like the long wall that they had. They were reopening the side streets, right, of the City Place Mall downtown. And one of the things that I think is going to be one of the benefits of that in terms of placemaking is obviously everyone's walked down that street before, right? And you've got, you know, this big monolithic wall as you're walking down towards the lake, that's really not engaging at all. I mean, talk about loneliness. You really feel like you're on a solo walk along 2 blocks of what used to be, I think, parking garages on the side of the mall. So when they're, in this first phase of the mall redevelopment downtown, one of the things that was, one of the most important pieces of that redesign was reintroducing the side streets. So now, right, they're cutting the streets, the north-south streets, through that mall space. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to create a dialogue between the pedestrians on the street and everyone inside the spaces. And in doing so, they're recreating place, and they're improving a core piece of the downtown core. A really important part of Burlington will now have so much more of a dynamic interchange between the pedestrians, shoppers, and just foot traffic that didn't exist before. So massive design change that looks obvious now, but back when they built that mall, that wasn't sort of the design paradigm of the time. I mean, it was all about a big indoor space where you never had to step outside. And I'm just really excited to see that in this design stage, they're gonna fix that, or they're gonna improve that by creating more of a public community space downtown that really didn't exist before.
Great, thanks, Russ. Jen?
Yeah, I think, with this question, and getting back to the fact that we're talking about artistic practices or creative practices, right, beyond just the drawing and beyond the picture. So there are a lot of ways that artists have explored places and really questioned, how do we know a place? And there's an expression out there, right, is problem seeking versus problem solving, or at least starting with a problem seeking before you get into the problem solving, so that you're really thinking about, what is this place and what potential changes are a benefit to some groups and maybe not so beneficial to other groups. And some of the ways that we've, within some of the classes I teach and working with students, when we're trying to understand something or get to know a place, we'll use multi-sensory approaches to understanding the place. So one example is that with the Art and AI Research Group, when we were working with the Vermont Advanced Computing Center, and this was during the pandemic, so we really didn't have much of a sense of what this place was like, right, with all the computers. And I bet you we were the first research group to ask them to give us a recording of what it sounded like inside. But what we discovered from that was that all we could hear on that recording were fans. And so those are the fans that are keeping the computers cool, which led us to sort of understand the amount of energy that's being used and the environmental impact of these kinds of supercomputers, which really started to impact how we thought about our work and how we wanted to be efficient about how we use the computers. Another example is in graphic design classes, we do these exercises called form storming, where the students are actually choosing sort of a symbol or a shape. It could be something like a hexagon or something like that. And you're going out and you're trying to find that shape in places where, and just anywhere. And so what happens, the students come back and they have seen their environment through a completely different lens. And it's they also talk about how it was just a really nice way to sort of be for a while, to just be focused on one thing and seeing a place in a new way. And other ways we've done this is with sound mapping, where you are going out into an area and you're just trying to understand it through the sounds. You're taking field recordings, you're pulling them together. They're making other kinds of connections. So this kind of multi-sensory approach and real exploration of what is a place and how do we know this place and how do we determine what's important about this place and how might my perspective be really different than somebody else's, and then pulling that information together before we start going and making change.
Thank you. Sonja, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Sure, I'll just add, I think Jen has just given us a couple of really lovely examples, same as Russ, that when the arts and artist-centered, partnerships and collaborations happen, I think our public spaces are more successful in terms of spreading the welcome around in our communities. And I think, I'll say again what I know has already been said in a couple of different ways today, but arts organizations and artists should be around every single table at which decisions about our built environment and our community spaces are being made, at the outset. So,
Well, to build on that too, I mean, a public art project can be these kinds of explorations that we're talking about. It doesn't have to, a public art project doesn't necessarily have to be putting up a sculpture or at that phase. It can be in this early phase of the investigative part. And there are many art practices that are research-based, and so you're getting this sort of free-form exploration, multisensory kind of research that is still research, but it's a creative research. There's creative ethnographic research where you're looking at different ways people use a place or go through a space, and they're very meaningful and very rewarding to participate. And they're not necessarily, again, they're not really necessarily looking for that ultimate solution, but the information that comes from this sort of very free question asking can be very rich and very helpful for those who do need to follow through and make some final decisions.
And really important not to skip that stage and have the right people in the room when that stage is being explored. Thank you. Just one final question, which we only have a few minutes for, but Jen, you mentioned earlier the governments of many countries around the world highly prioritize funding their arts and culture sectors, and here in the United States, we've traditionally relied much more heavily on philanthropy. So I'm just wondering if we can encourage people in the room to figure out ways to increase investment in the arts and culture sectors, not only from our government, but maybe even engage private investors rather than just wishing and hoping and relying on philanthropy.
I think I can only speak in a very limited way to this, but in terms of the Fab Lab, which is our digital fabrication lab at UVM, has quadrupled in size over the last 7 years, and that has been from meeting the needs of the university and the college. We're in the College of Engineering, so it's been about trying to meet the needs of the engineering faculty and the strategic plan set forth by the dean, and then putting that into another framework of strategic goals of the university. Using our down times to bring in other disciplines. Like we have many studio art classes now going through it. That's because there's more engineering courses coming through in the spring, so we can bring in more arts classes in the spring, but it sort of takes that kind of, again, I think that kind of creative, poking around, but also really looking at what needs are being put forward, and artists, I think I kind of feel like this question kind of comes back at us, but in the arts, I think we really need to really take seriously how we can advocate for what we do, because there is this sort of conception of art is just about pictures, and what we're talking about here is it's more than that. So as people in the arts, this is not for everyone, really, but for some of us who really kind of enjoy this challenge, it's really about advocating and making those connections with other disciplines that might not necessarily be thinking about the arts, but being able to have that conversation about where we might find value around building those bridges.
Beautiful, thank you. Russ or Sonja?
Yeah, I guess, in terms of going back to placemaking, I think that, if you did an A-B study and you said, listen, I'm gonna create this structure, it's a community space. Here's design A, here's design B. Design B is gonna cost you a lot more, but look how beautiful it is. This is gonna be a more engaging space. It really, it comes down to that level of decision of what is the purpose of this thing. And I think a lot of people obviously agree that the value in that investment will be felt going forward. So, to get to your question around philanthropy, yeah, philanthropy is a big one. Art is just so all-encompassing, it's really kind of hard. You almost have to get a little bit narrower about the areas of art that you really want to focus on, because literally, again, in my opinion, it always goes back to design, and a really well-designed product, service, building, space, whatever it is, generally has higher value and it costs more. So if you're asking, hey, where is the investment in art? I would say it's already happening, because I think a lot of times, especially with private capital, people are interested in doing something they're proud of, right? If it's really just sustenance and it's something like, hey, we need this, we need to get it done as cheaply as possible, we need to ramp volume here, it's not really a specialty play. If it's a specialty play, there's going to be a lot of attention to design and details. And all of that is going to end up costing more money, obviously, but it's also going to require a different level of expertise, which ultimately taps into all the specialty sort of design skill sets that come with everyone who goes into product design, architecture, anything that's going to interface with a customer that ultimately lands as an end product that's going to create value for the person that made that investment.
Great, thanks. Sonja, do you want to add?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. I mean, I think what we're talking about so much today and tomorrow is that innovation is really mined from a prioritized commitment to partnership and collaboration. Maybe said another way is that whether it's a project budget or your organization's annual operating budget, budgets are essentially moral documents. They are statements of your values. And I think prioritizing these commitments to dismantling silos that keep us from working together and keep us from having these conversations is not the direction to go in. So yeah.
Thank you. Our time is up. This is a conversation that we hope that you will continue thinking about yourself and talking about in your own communities, whether it be your own business community, school community, or your town that you live in. And I hope we'll just leave you with the remembrance that art is not the icing on the cake, but it is the whole cake and essential to practically every aspect of our society. So thank you so much. Oh, yes? I think our time is up. Is that right on the agenda? You had a quick question? We'll take a quick question, but yes. Beautiful. I'm going to just summarize in case everybody couldn't hear. Trying to find people who may be interested in reestablishing singing for people who have lung diseases, and Department of Medicine and music. So, kind of connecting all of these departments through the arts, and this is one powerful thing, and it's just really value aligning, prioritizing, and infusing it into all we do. So thank you. Appreciate it.